and there were some changes along the way, and I'll discuss down the road a little bit about how some of those changes affected us at the NRCS level with technical reasons. So, yeah, I also threw this in there. It's just basically the certification language off the 1026. And really all I wanted to have out of this was so that folks realize that this is on there. This is what they're signing. Again, speaking from the Ohio prism, I think a lot of our producers don't really understand what they're signing on the 1026. A lot of times it's another piece of paper that just kind of comes across. They sign it. They know they need to do it, so they stay in production. And then beyond that, I don't know where it goes. Actually, a former president of the NACD lives right up the road from me. And I asked him one day, I said, well, how many people do you think really know what they're reading here, what they're agreeing to when they sign off about the HEL and the conversion of wetlands? He said, I would guess somewhere in the 20 to 25% range. The rest of the folks are just kind of going about it business as usual. So that's just kind of something I try to keep out there so they know what's happening. And I also threw in there, these are the Food Security Act responsibilities, and I try really hard to cite where I got this out of the Food Security Act manual. That's on the 5th version. As far as I know, that is the current one. It has not changed. But all this is really saying is that all of this falls to the state con, who then delegates it all out. So, these delegation of duties can end up just about anywhere, but by far and large, it's really the state resource con staff and soil scientists to some degree. And that really kind of depends on where you are in the nation. With Colorado being newer in surveys, again, their data is a little more correct than Ohio's is as you look at the Surgo data. Again, I'll cover all that stuff in just a moment. But again, just kind of showing what all falls into this. And this one's about impossible to read, but I couldn't figure out how to cut it up. It's just there to look at later on. But this all talks about making the initial HEL list, how this happened in 1985. To me, I think it's valuable to know how all this came about so we know what we're dealing with, especially now as we're getting people coming in from the crop insurance side that maybe haven't worked with us in the past. Being able to talk a little bit of the history behind this as to why we're doing what we're doing with highly erodible land and wetlands, I find pretty valuable. And I've put the one part in red there, approved by the state soil scientists, because what that's saying is, basically, if there was a soil survey done in 1990, that was the survey of record that would be used to make the HEL list. That was the maps, that was the frozen T and K values. All of that comes together. However, there are places that are having the once over. You've got several Forest Service areas here. Yep. So as they do the once over, you'll have to develop the HEL map unit list for them. Will it ever be used there? I doubt it. I mean, I don't know that there's any cropping in that area, but you never know. And I think we're required to have an HEL list for any survey that's out there. So this basically just covers how we came up with the lists in the first place. And most of the nation that is farmed intensely already has HEL lists from the 90s. But again, this is just kind of some background history on how all that goes. I did throw this in there also just because, I had to remember where Colorado was. It's in the notch of Nebraska. That's how I had to keep thinking about it. But you can see the areas in gray right there. Those would be the areas that are not finished as of June 2014. Could have changed by now, but I doubt it. Anyway, as those come online, we will need to develop HEL lists for them, and that's true of all the areas in the West that are currently being mapped. So, again, then there's a lot of duties here. I had seen one of the questions people were asking, what are whose responsibilities? So that's why I threw some of these in the beginning. The QAR duties here just kind of talks about the fact that the state con, and coming down from the chief even, is supposed to be working with the quality assurance reviews to do these checks to make sure, one, that the determinations were done right in the first place, and that secondly, when a compliance review is done, that the compliance review is checked. So we're making sure that we're grading our customers fairly. So again, no reason to read through this unless somebody really wants me to. Seeing no hands up, I will move on. So this is, again, just the general concepts of everything, and I've kind of covered some of it. The lists have to be developed using a soil survey legend. Fields that have potentially highly erodible map units have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. And the fields that have been determined as highly erodible have to have a con plan or a system in place. And we'll get into that whole con plan versus system in a little bit here. But again, I just kind of find it useful to go through this. So, you know, basically, I want to talk about why we ever came up with HEL in the first place. You know, of course, erosion. You know, we definitely wanted to reduce erosion. So if somebody had ground that we determined was highly erodible and we held them to some sort of standard, it is going to cut back on our sediment loads in streams and just basically cutting down on the amount we're losing to make the land less productive. Improving water quality, I mean, when we get right down to it, that's the big part of what we do as NRCS. A lot of it comes back to that. And really, it was discouraging bringing a lot of marginal lands into production. And it helped to keep marginal lands back out, too. But the sodbuster portion was really what tried to stop people from taking away native vegetation. Out of curiosity, here in Colorado, what do they define as native vegetation?
What's there before it was farmed?
Okay.
Yeah.
Like in Ohio was 100% wooded, more or less. We had a few prairie areas, but everything was wooded. And we've gone, and this is actually an FSA call who makes this, you know, what is native vegetation. We've gone with, if it's wooded, it's native. If it's not, it's not. Because most of our pastures are cool season grasses that weren't native to the area. Again, that's something you need to work out with your local FSA. And if that's the ruling, that it's whatever was there before, stick with it.
Yeah, it's pretty much just rangeland. If it's range,
Mm-hmm.
that would be native vegetation.
Okay, very good. And I'm pretty ignorant on Colorado, so that's why I'll continue to ask these questions. I don't know cropping systems or really the state all that well. It does fit well with other programs like CRP. I mean, it's a key part. When you've got CRP pushing after areas that are HEL, take them out of production. Kind of goes hand in hand with discouraging bringing the marginal land into production part. So, again, back to, you know, this is just developing the HEL list, and what we did was we took whatever our current data was. It was the legend for the soil survey that would have been in play as of 1990, and then you have to assign erodibility classes. It's non-highly in potential, and I've seen you also lists there for that. So, but how we actually came about that was, at least in Ohio, and I'm assuming it was similar here, that you got a bunch of people together and you really had a long discussion about, all right, this map unit is Epping silt loam 0 to 9%. What's a realistic range and slope for this map unit? What's a range and slope length? And, you know, they kind of hashed that out to decide. And of course they used whatever the K and the T factor and the R factors were. So again, K factor is just your susceptibility to erosion. And your T factor is tons of soil per acre per year you can lose and still be productive. And the rain factors, the R factor is your rainfall. If I remember right, the rainfall factor is derived not just on the amount of rain, but the intensity of storms. And it's changed. You know, the USLE portion of rainfall factor, it was one thing, and now RUSLE has one for just about every county, if I remember right. So there was actually frozen lists for all of these things that you're seeing in this particular slide. So it's just something to think about if you're doing a calculation by hand. Remember, you want the frozen R factor along with the K and T and all that. So at any rate, this was what they worked with. They had this, like I said, we'd get a group of people together. You take the Epping silt loam of 0 to 9%, with a K value of 0.43 and 2. I got all that from Colorado's information there. And then Food Security Act Manual 5112 tells you to use this equation of AT over RK. And that's what gives you your maximum LS value. I think I had, no, not on there. This must be the next one. So you run through that calculation and you get this maximum LS. And then this one's a little hard to see, and I apologize for that. But this is the LS factor chart that we used through the USLE system. And what I did was I just highlighted all the areas that had a LS factor of less than 0.74 that we came up with for that AT over RK there. So that what this told us was, if you look at this, 0 to 9%, so on the far left would be your 0, on the far right would be the 9. You've got anything above 5% slope and 200 feet in slope length becomes HEL. Anything at 6% slope and above 125, it looks like, becomes HEL. So everything that's in the yellow is a non-HEL combination of length and slope, and everything that's in the white between those slope ranges is the highly erodible. And that's how this one ended up on the potentially highly erodible list, because there were portions of this map unit that would be non-highly. There's others that are highly erodible, so it had to go in the we don't know section. Now, another example would be that Kim-Shingle complex. I believe it's another PHEL, if memory serves me right. By the way, all of this was done out of the Northern Weld survey. I just used one area, and to be honest, I fumbled around quite a bit, but I think I got most of it. So the Kim-Shingle complex was 6 to 30% slopes. There was the frozen K and T. I ran through the equation again and came up with a 2.5 max LS. Yeah, it's just a repeat of what we did in the last one. So I did the same thing, lined out everything in highlight as far as what would be non-HEL compared to everything non-highlighted up to 30% slope would be highly erodible. So again, it was decided that enough of this map unit could fall either way that it had to go into the potentially highly erodible map unit list. What I find kind of fascinating is we did this for the entire state. Every state did this. Think about how much work that really was to do in 1985. I don't think Excel was around at that point. Maybe Lotus 123. I don't even know if that was there. So somebody put a lot of work behind these, and I truly respect what they went through. But again, you can see on there anywhere under 2.5. I just cut that off. So does that do a pretty good job of explaining how we came up with the highly erodible and the non-highly erodible map units?
I think it does.
Okay. And then here's just an excerpt from the county. Again, I know these are going to be hard to read on this view, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't realize it would be taped, but all I did was throw up a couple arrows to show there's the Epping silt loam and the Kim-Shingle complex. And on the far right, they're potentially highly erodible map units. So, yeah, again, this is just kind of a crosswalk. A lot of this is really meant for people that have never done HEL before. I developed it mostly as training for folks that were new to the job, entry-level soil cons and soil scientists, but sometimes it's a nice refresher too, because I'll catch things that I didn't realize. You can read the manual 50 times and then all of a sudden it'll click. So, we had all these HEL lists and then they froze it. Why did HEL freeze over? There's a couple reasons for that. And basically the biggest one was after we had done the initial soil survey over most of the United States, we started doing updates because there were always things we weren't happy with. Maybe a correlator said you couldn't use this soil series, or you realized that really we mapped these two soils right here and they're not that different from one another. So we started changing the maps, and really that was the drive by the conservation side, that they wanted more consistent maps, which was great. But the problem that comes out of that is neighboring properties start getting judged on different factors, because say BJ had a farm and they did the determination in 1985, they could do mine right next to him in 2005, and it's going to be different because we've done an update. And so they really decided to freeze everything so everybody got judged on the same set of factors all the way across. It's really more of a fairness issue than anything else. And it gets really interesting. Like in eastern Ohio, we have still a lot of surface mining, and you'll come by and you'll see where somebody wants an HEL determination on a piece of ground that has been flattened, but you still have to use the frozen map. It doesn't matter what's there. It's kind of funny because you can end up with an HEL ground that's at 1% slope. In the end, it all irons out with the compliance. We can talk about that later. But again, the frozen map is what it is. The other thing that kind of came about when they froze over the HEL, they had to do it because everything that was used to develop the HEL map lists, the potential, non, and highly, was all under USLE. And universal soil loss equation, everybody loved it, as far as I can tell. Most folks would ditch RUSLE in a second and go back to USLE just because It makes sense to them. It's straightforward. But the argument was the USLE was really harsh. It was tough to meet the goals that we wanted out of farmers. Which one is right? I don't know. I don't have an ability to make that call. But nonetheless, we knew we were moving away from USLE technology. So again, to keep things the same, we had to keep making determinations using that frozen data and USLE types of equations, but we're moving on to RUSLE. RUSLE is what's become our standard for everything else. So the best thing we could do is freeze the list as of 90 and keep on using the USLE equation to make the initial determination. And to me, that's probably one of the hardest parts is making folks stick to the USLE side and the frozen list and then realizing they have to ditch it down the road and go into everything that's modern beyond that. When wetlands don't follow that same system, it makes it even more difficult. Here you are trying to work on Food Security Act stuff, and half of it runs off of a partially frozen list and the other half doesn't. Tough. But now some of the parts in here are more applicable to Ohio than they are for Colorado, but back to what does this mean for us? In Ohio, we chose to put everything on the Field Office Tech Guide Section 2. Wherever you all store it is entirely up to you. I've not really found anything in the system or in the manual that tells me where I should be storing this data, but that seemed like the most likely for me. So we chose to put it all in there. Everything's in Section 2. I'll cover a little bit of what we have in there later. And it's, back to the rulings that come out of the 85 Farm Bill, the 96, those were probably the two biggest that really affected HEL. That it's greater than a third of the acreage is HEL mapped units or 50 acres in that field. It's highly erodible and it needs a system. And PHEL fields require a field visit for slope percent and length if they meet that 50 acre 1/3 rule. And this is the thing I have to stress the most is that the maps are frozen along with the other factors. So in Ohio, we had a very strong MLRA process. People were really moving in and changing maps. I did it myself in West Virginia. We thought we were helping. And really, we took a lot of these maps very far away from what the frozen mapping was in 1990. So I'm fighting an uphill battle of trying to redigitize maps that are usable for the field because I've probably got 15 counties that changed entirely from the frozen mapping to today. I don't think you'll see anything that drastic here in Colorado in talks with BJ, but it's kind of a reminder that you're going to need to freeze these maps along with everything else because they will change down the road. It's a little bit of a workload for you now, but it'll keep you being in the same situation I'm in now. So, and this top one is really for us, the dusty old soil survey is now your official data. All these years we told everybody, stop, you don't use the manuscript. That's not the official data. Go to Datamart before it was gone. Now go to Web Soil Survey. Well, in Ohio, it means a lot of times we actually have to go back to the manuscript because our Sergo data that you're able to pull up in GIS and Toolkit. To be fair, I probably use ArcGIS and Toolkit intermittently throughout this whole thing. I'm not a Toolkit user. I don't know a lot about it, so bear with me with that. But anytime I say one or the other, it means either because you can do them either way. So again, it's part 2 is really more for Ohio, but we're georeferencing our frozen maps so people have something to work off of. It's a quick way to throw them up there and say, oh, wait, my lines are all different. Again, not a big problem for here in Colorado, but I left it in there as a warning. Don't end up where we are. So ArcGIS maps are usually the same as the manuscript. I mean, in 90% of Ohio and probably more than that in Colorado, they're the same, so you can continue to use them. We also were mentioning that we store the LS factor chart in the Field Office Tech Guide. And we did have field training to just kind of go over shooting slopes and estimating slope lengths. It's up to you all whether you'd want to do something like that. I thought it was valuable. It was kind of fun to bring the people from Northwest Ohio, which is a giant lake plain, and bring them somewhere that had some relief and watch them try to figure out what a slope was or what a slope length was, because it was a completely different world for them, and vice versa. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm going kind of fast, or everybody with us?
I think it's okay. The one thing I'd like to point out too at this point is we talk about K and T factors being used and going back to the original determinations. As we do these calculations this year, and as we mentioned that we're going to do, it's important to note that there is no archive once we do that,
Right.
of the previous K and T values. And I've kind of told the LT meetings folks that the same thing, that once we push the button, the information does go away. This is not one of those situations where we'll have levels of servo data left over that we can go back and we can look in our archives to determine. Once we calculate these values in our database, there is no archive for them, so we're going to have new K and T values. Not that it matters much for the frozen list, because we still have those, but that will fall back on where do we store these now, because it will become a little bit different whenever we don't look back at our archives and we can't find the Ks and Ts anymore, that the only place that we do have these. So we might want to have a conversation here in Colorado again about where we're going to store some of this information, or to make it available, because once we hit that calculation button, yeah, it's gone. So I just want to point that out, and for future reference or whatever, it's for what it's worth.
Yeah.
We've still got a set of servo databases though, from the previous survey.
Yeah.
When you push the button October 1,
Right.
all those static databases are still in place.
in the archival tables, but
Right.
there are very few people who use servo data, to that extent to get values out of things that I'm finding. So I just want to make sure that we know where it's at or how to, and that's true. We just say go to the previous servo data tables, but we want to make sure that we're pointing out that you can't get it out of WSL survey anymore.
Understood.
Yeah. Question out there?
Yeah, I've got a question. So there must be two frozen HEL lists, one for water erosion and one for wind. The one that I've always used is based on the C factor for wind. I'm not familiar with the LS one.
Yeah, that's true. We don't have much that's HEL for water. It's wind is our issue. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Right. So do we even have access to the LS?
LS is length and slope. Are we talking about?
Yeah, it's length, slope factor. Length
Right,
and
but
slope. Yeah.
But that's a different list, wouldn't it be? A
Yeah, it
different
is
HEL
different.
list.
Well, you guys, I can show you an example a little bit later on. I believe I scanned one of your sheets that has both.
The list has both, and the worksheets have both.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And maybe Jim can jump in and help me a little bit on these when we get to them. You can explain those a little better, because Ohio doesn't recognize wind erosion. I'm pretty solid on the water erosion more so. And actually, it was kind of a surprise to me as I was going back and looking at these, PHEL list. I'm not going to do that. That's terrible. Anyway, as I was going back and looking at how you would have come up with that for Epping and things like that, it was blowing my mind that for water erosion, you could have that high of a slope. The rule of thumb in Ohio is if it's over 4% slope and 150 foot in length, it's going to be HEL. There are exceptions to the rule, but the fact that you have coarser textures in your surface horizons and not a big R factor really makes a big difference for your water erosion. It boggled my mind how high you could go in these, but it was a nice learning experience for me. And maybe I'll get something out of this in the wind erosion part. And, I never even thought about that. I apologize. I never thought about the fact that would be your bigger thing.
Yeah, the WQ.
Yes, and I'd be glad for you to take me to school on this one later. That would be fantastic. So, I guess, again, hopefully this is viewable to you all there, but what I wanted to do is just kind of show what it looks like in GIS versus the manuscript. When I say the manuscript, I just mean the printed soil survey that's around. And I'm assuming all your counties got printed at some point or another.
Not the ones that were done post 2000.
Okay. So you may have some that aren't printed at all. This was kind of more of, I was being the doubting Thomas there. I wanted to see if there were any changes to the lines or not. And believe me, this was a very small example, just kind of looking at northern Weld County and finding my way around. It was very difficult for me because there's not a lot of landmarks on the manuscript. So trying to figure out where I was anywhere. But all I'm showing in this, though, is on the left-hand side, your GIS/toolkit map looks just like what the manuscript was. So you're good to go. There's no worries about whether you're using the wrong set of map units. Again, I think that's going to be a very small problem for you all. You'll be able to get out ahead of this and not have it become a problem like it did in the East. And, when I say Ohio has problems, it's not just us. A lot of the East was further ahead on the MLRA process, so a lot of our maps are messed up. So we're fixing them slowly but surely. I know Pennsylvania is in the same boat I am. And here's just another one. You know, again, I was proving them to myself. I wanted to see what the maps looked like. I was not able to download the orthophotography behind it. It was just too big, so that didn't happen. I apologize, but you've got topo maps on the left there. That was just kind of helping me key out where I was. But as far as I can tell, everything is fine there. You know, to me, that's your first step when you're making that determination. Make sure you got the right mapping. And again, for you all, it shouldn't be a big deal. So if the mapping is the same, I use Toolkit or ArcGIS, again, to come up with the field acreages and the percentages, because, you know, you will have a CLU layer from the FSA. You can use that to come up with, and that's where you can use your HEL classes. And that's how you decide all that. You're just cross-referencing against the field acres you're coming up with versus your list. And again, it's all about that 33 1/3. I kind of put that in there just to be funny. I never put the third. I mean, who does that? But 33% of the map unit, or excuse me, 33% of the field, if it's HEL, the whole field goes that way. If it's a big field and it has 50 acres, doesn't matter where they fall, it becomes that HEL. That's a bigger problem, I think, with people combining. You know, this all went back to, and we'll cover that, you can't combine to get out of an HEL determination. That's why that 50-acre rule stays in there. So, you know, if all your map units are highly erodible or not highly erodible, it's really pretty easy. You know, whether it's wind or water, you have that key in your in your frozen list. It's easy enough. You just apply the rule, and it's simple enough. One thing I guess I'd like to ask the group is when FSA sends you over 1026 and say they're going to split a field, do they do a pretty good job of showing you where that split is going to be?
Yeah, they usually send over a map, and in the past we've, if we need to, we'll wait until the updated CLU comes out if there's any question about it.
Great. That's exactly what I was driving at. That's really what you should get is the initial CLU that comes over when they've done it, and then you make the determination off of it. We've done them where they'll send over like a big field, they cut it in half, north to south with a marker, and we say, okay, you know, I can figure this out. And we'll get a little further in that later. But again, you know, if you have all HEL and non-HEL, it's simple enough. And I guess I was asking that question too because I didn't go to the nitty-gritty of, you know, the CLU will come over or where you get it from, because everybody manages data differently. If I try to tell you where to get it, it's probably not going to look the same. So, you know, the bigger problem that comes out of this is PHEL. If you have a lot of potentially highly erodible map units, it really makes the determination a whole lot more difficult. So just to give you an idea, everything in blue there, don't quote me on this, I might have missed a few map units, but everything in blue there should be potentially highly erodible map units in northern Weld County. And I'm assuming that's going to fall true in a lot of eastern Colorado. There's going to be a lot of things that are potentially highly because you've got slope groups that just meet that criteria. So we run into that in northwest part of Ohio where everything is 2 to 6% slope. Everything is potentially highly erodible. It's a complete hassle. So this was just kind of a graphic to show that there is a lot of it out there, and it does confound what you're up to. So I pulled an example there and basically just drew out a random FSA track. And this was assuming that it had not been done before. They're sending over a brand new one coming out. I was pretty fascinated with the diagonal cut there to the left. I didn't know what was going on, but if somebody wants to explain that to me at some point, I'd love to know what's going on there. Basically, you know, and a lot of times I'm making up numbers here. I wasn't doing this in GIS, so bear with me. So quick legend, map unit 27 would be your Epping PHEL, and then you've got 44 is only a non-HEL. So now you got to figure out, you know, where does this fall? I made it up. I just said that, you know, it's 14 acres, so it's 35% of the field. So that triggers you that it has to go one way or another. It's either HEL or it's not, because it's potentially highly erodible. Now we got to go back to looking at slopes and slope lengths in the field. This is the part that slows a lot of people down, and it can be difficult to deal with. This is an extremely simple example. Out of curiosity, is it a lot more difficult than this usually, or is this fairly common? I don't even know if my scales are even close to right on this. I don't know how big fields are out here, or was this order 3 mapping?
Yeah.
So it's probably a whole lot bigger than a 40-acre field what I just drew out there. But let me know if I'm being too simplistic, but I should have some tougher ones down the road. So I just threw out a random number, though, saying that Epping was 35%. So that puts us over the 33% threshold that we needed. So now we got to figure it out. So, I just threw a couple of these in here. And the first thing you would have to go do is figure out slope length. And boy, is it subjective. I mean, when we did the training that I mentioned earlier on in this thing, I got numbers from soup to nuts. They were all over the place. It's hard to tell what's truly right. The main thing is you're looking where the water starts its flow and where the deposition starts. That's where you're coming up with that slope length, because you'll use that along with your slope percent to do your LS factor and then use it in your calculation. But that's a real simple part out of Ag Handbook 703. That's the RUSLE one technically, but it's the same idea. They all manage the same. So if you're more interested in other methodologies, there's some stuff in there that I don't follow at all. It talks about different ways to measure downslope and angles to the water and things. I typically shoot straight down slope, or at least whatever way I think water is going to flow, and call it a day. There's a lot of scholarly effort out there, but I don't know that we can follow all of it, to be perfectly honest. So anyway, that's the long and short of determining slope length there. They do say that most will fall within 300 feet. We've found that to be true. I don't know if that's true for you all. My thing is, in the east, you find there's a lot of places that water will divert, and you kind of have to watch for it. There might be a cow path going across there that the water's going to hit and go. So it's not really 300 feet, it's 125, because you've hit some little change in the landscape. I don't know how common diversion ditches are out here, probably not, but we have a lot of those. So those are all the things you kind of take into account as you're trying to figure out how long of a slope length you want to pin on this. And the main thing here too is fields are complex. Nothing ever looks like that in profile. You go out, you're going to see 100 different slopes and probably 50 angles, and it's tough to figure out what you want to do with that. My advice has always been, and this can be contradicted, but look for the 20% of the most limiting, but don't look at areas that are outliers. You don't want to be taking measurements on the flat or some extremely steep little piece that happens to go into that field, things like that. You want to look for something that's representative of the entire map unit. You might have to do this a couple of times to get somewhere that you're comfortable with it and average them. I know that does happen. And then the other part of it is shooting the slope. Of course, you can use a clinometer or an Abney level. My smartphone actually has one. There's a really interesting clinometer one for Androids. Works pretty well. I like this guy. This is from the Pasture NRI. He gets way more into shooting slope than I do. I generally just stand and shoot for something that should be about the same height as myself. But if you really wanted a good 3-point, 4-point stance to make sure you're shooting straight, you could do that. So, at any rate, it's up to you. I'm assuming everybody's pretty comfortable with shooting slopes and getting slope lengths, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it is something that you develop over time, and it's worth seeing areas around because there's always something to throw you a loop. Again, not knowing the landforms, I don't have anything in particular. It's kind of a recap of what I was saying before. Look at it as a whole. You're looking on averages. One thing I didn't mention is slope length could start outside the field boundary. If the field stops like halfway up a hill, you could be shooting from where the water is going to detach in the first place and start to water down. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. So once you have that slope length and slope percent, that's how you get your LS factor to get the value for your erodibility index. And we'll cover some more of that too. The other thing I'm going to key in on here is it's really valuable to record these somewhere along the way. just have them in there, and we'll talk about where to store these things down the road, or at least some ideas. But if you have these lengths and slopes already done, and it's filed away somehow, somebody comes out to do a compliance check, they're going to be checking that person against the very same slopes and lengths that you're looking at, and you're not getting two different things. If BJ says it's 200, I say it's 400, and then his was the determination at 200, and I say 400 for the compliance check, looks a little weird. So not everybody does it, and we're getting better about it, but again, the more data you keep on this, the better off you are down the road, especially with compliance checks. Jim, in Colorado, is HEL really contentious at all, or is it just kind of go on?
With wind, yes.
It is?
Quite so.
Okay. In Ohio, it's not particularly contentious. Most people will take an HEL determination laying down and say, okay, whatever, we're used to it, you know. Now, compliance time is certainly different. But you're saying for wind, it can be more contentious in the initial call?
Yeah,
Okay.
Wind is our issue.
And all the more reason to have all these things there, because, you know, if this goes to reconsideration or through the appeal rights, the more information you have behind this determination, the better off you are. Nobody likes to go into a NAT appeal with, you know, 2 pieces of paper or an old napkin or something. I've seen it happen. So, you know, back to that example there, you know, again, I assumed it was 40 acres of the field, the total field, 14 acres of which would be the Epping. Then we determined, again, just for the fun of it, it was 3% slope and a slope length of 150 feet. So what does that give us? Yeah, I bring in that LS chart again. There's really 2 ways you can skin this cat as you're doing a determination. You can do the LS factor, figure it out from the chart, or you can go through the other equation that I'll show you later. But again, it's at 3%, 150 feet. I should have it marked right there. It's 0.32. So when you calculate the EI, this is your basic calculation, comes right out of the Food Security Act manual there. This was all for sheet and reel again, and I apologize for that. I did not think about the fact you guys had so much wind here. But the basic equation is RKLS, meaning the factor, not length times slope, over T. Again, using your frozen T, RK, and then that gives your erodibility index. And if it's greater than 8, it's highly erodible. So for our example we just did there, there's the frozen values, and I took them out of, I believe it's part 2 of the HEL data that you have there that has the frozen T's and K's on it there. I used them to come up with the calculation. Your EI comes out at 3.44, so that's less than 8. It's not HEL. But I did throw it in there, you know, had it gone to a 6% slope in that slope length, it would have come out as highly erodible because it would have come out greater than 8. I'm glossing over a little bit of that. I'm sure you guys don't need me to work through basic math on that, and I'll bore you to death. But any questions thus far? Does this make sense? Okay. Hearing none.
It took me a minute to turn it off mute. Can I ask a question about slope length and slope?
Absolutely.
Is there any guidance on using like a digital elevation model to estimate slope?
Yeah. Well, on my next slide, I'm so glad somebody did that. I was betting on that header. So to go back to that, you know, from the Food Security Act manual, it clearly says on site, and I stuck to it for a long time that we needed to go look at it. That's what I felt needed done. However, like we talked about before, that really we're going to get more because people are going to need these determinations to do crop insurance, things like that. I'm starting to change my mind. I really am, because forgive me, all this slide here, all that is the basic wording out of the Food Security Act, talking about what you need to do, how to do it, document, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, there's pros and cons to both of it. And, you know, I think that originally they wanted us to do these things out in the field because it does follow the interpretation of it, and it was FaceTime with the landowner. You know, that was a big thing. This was kind of a key way to get us in with them and say, hey, you know, this is what you can do to make it better. Why don't you think about, would have been what, LTP at the time would have been the program probably. Now it's EQIP. You know, that was the idea, I believe. A lot of this is theory and conjecture, so take it for what it is. But it does take a long time to do, and it's subjective. You know, it is very subjective. So with ArcGIS, it is quicker. It could be more defensible as long as somebody knows what they're doing. We use LiDAR to do this from time to time. Again, the cons are it doesn't really follow the policy, you know, but depends on how strict you want to read it. Personally, the way I see it is they said on-site because what was your other methodology in 1985? Getting out of Stadia and figuring it out on a topo map? Anybody remember how to use a topo aid? I don't. I can look at them though, and I put it right back in the bag. So I think that it was written based on the technology at the time, and I don't see any reason that you couldn't use ArcGIS to do it. Again, work with your SRC shop on that one because they're the ones that are going to be dealing with this a whole lot more than I am. Or BJ for that matter. I keep forgetting who I'm talking to. You know, I think that with updated methods, you're fine to go with it. And given the workload increase that I'm betting is coming, I don't see any reason you can't use digital elevation models. BJ said there's LiDAR available for a fair piece of the state, and
Well, yeah, I mean, sections of it.
okay. And I guess the safe bet that I threw in there was do it however you want in that first cut, but if they ask for a reconsideration or it goes on somewhere else, go look at it. Make sure you don't show up with just a map that you generated from your office. And I believe that's the way it's written in the Food Security Act manual, that we're supposed to have off-site methods to run first and then move on and go through, because they realize that we don't have the time to go lay eyes on everything that's out there. What are we told every day? Do more with less. And we're trying, but you know, it takes time. So I threw out some examples here. You know, there's some things that we did in Ohio that I think have been helpful, and I'll leave you all some examples, and whatever you choose to do with it is fine. But we have a spreadsheet where we combined all of the HEL classes, the map unit name, the frozen T and K. You would have to do the same for your wind erosion side of it too, I would assume. And, you know, well, I guess I got ahead of myself there. We actually have a spreadsheet that will calculate out highly erodible land that can use all that. But for that to work, you have to have all your lists in Excel. Basically, it's a master Excel that works off of all the separate county ones. And I'll show you all how that one works a little bit later. So, you know what? I kind of blew right into that. Did I answer your question well enough on the using digital elevation models and things like that? They should have a button on the remote.
Yes.
Okay. It was an unqualified maybe, right?
Yes.
What else could you ask for? So, anyway, yes?
Yes.
Oh, that was me. Yeah.
It's a little
I'm
like
talking to my echo. All right. So anyway, we have a few tools that, and I'll be real honest, we didn't develop this spreadsheet. It was co-opted from somebody in the Northeast. We just kind of changed it up a little bit for ourselves. And if it's something you would like to pursue, I can have somebody help you with it. He'll show you real quickly how to do it. Some people probably know how off the top of their heads. Some people can look at Excel and figure it out in a second. I have to fumble a little more, but there's also a lot of other ArcGIS tools that are coming out right now. Lots of people are working on this. I'll name names. Kevin Godsey down there in Missouri, he's doing a lot of it. I've looked at his. I have a guy in Ohio, Jason Undercoffer, that developed ones. There's a lot of clever things they can do with them, and the tools really vary based on how do you feel about doing the on-site investigation or not. The guy in my state, Jason, the way he developed his was it would do all of those that had enough NHEL or HEL class to call it one way or the other. If it had too much PHEL, it came back as a null and said you need to look at it somehow, some way. Kevin Godsey has some tools that will actually take LiDAR in, it will measure slopes, it'll do all sorts of stuff. It's really a tricky, or clever tool, I should say. It is tricky for me to use, but it's out there. So there's a lot of ways you can automate this. I believe Pennsylvania has really gone to doing a lot of these by ArcGIS. I have two minds on it. I would probably stick to with what I said earlier. go ahead and do it first with whatever methodology is best, and then if it comes up for recognition, go look at it. Or if you're just not sure, we have a lot of soils that fall in Ohio right on the break line. When I was saying 4% and 150, there's a ton of them that fall right at 4%. If I go take a LiDAR map and just spread it out with a complete slope map, I can't tell. So those are the ones we tend to go look at and just try to make sure we're making a better call. But quite a few fall on either way, so we can just move ahead with it, no problem. So again, I'll show you all some of these a little bit later on. Just to give you an example, that's what our spreadsheet looks like. This is our very basic HEL with the frozen Ks, Ts, map unit name and symbol, and the HEL class. Yours would be considerably larger because you would have to go ahead and put in all your wind stuff. And again, I'm not real familiar with how those work. But yeah, I haven't tried the live demo, but I probably am afraid to what would happen. All right, bear with me, folks. We'll see if this actually plays out. I just wanted to show you real quickly how ours works out as far as HEL goes. So this is our very base. Oh, that's hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So what we did was, after we got our HEL lists into that Excel file I just showed you, we basically just chunked them into big lists here. That's really all there is to it. And we did it by area because it was just easier to keep track of. And the way it works for us is, all you have to do is go and select the county, and it'll automatically populate your R value for you, which, like I was talking about earlier, is kind of valuable to know because the R factor for USLE was probably different than RUSLE. I don't know that for a fact. I was not able to find it, but is that true?
Yeah, they're two different ones.
Okay. Like in Ohio, it was a block. They basically put a crosshair on the state and said, this is 125, this is 150. Now you look at RUSLE, it's a complete quilt. They change everywhere. So anyway, there's your frozen R factor, which is pretty valuable to have. And then basically I can just go through and select my soil symbol, whatever it may be. It'll automatically populate my K factor and my T factor from the frozen list. Again, keeps you from having to fumble with paper. I think it's pretty valuable. How that works with the wind side, I don't know if there's a similar one to this that could do the same thing, but I can certainly help you look. I know a few people that could probably find the answer for you if this is something you'd be interested in doing. So you'll notice the LS factor is not populated right now, but it does let you put in whatever measurements you got for the slope percent and for the slope length. Again, I'm using that 4 and 150, and it'll automatically calculate as you click out. So I think this would be an easy adaptation for you all to do and could save you a lot of time without having to deal with those. Basically, this calculates the LS factor somewhere behind the scenes. I don't remember where, but somebody built a really tricky graph in there, and it seems to work. I've spot checked it against the LS factor charts, and it looks good to me. I cannot guarantee that every one of them is right, but it's worked well enough. So, basically that's all you need to do. You can go through and just change this to whatever. The only thing that we've run into as a problem is people forget to set the county first. Then they try to find the map units and it doesn't work. I get a call on that about once a week. But, Blount on a B slope is one of our biggest map unit areas in Ohio. When I'm showing Weld counties potentially highly erodible map units in blue, that's what Blount looks like all across western Ohio. So it's the bane of our existence. You're always dealing with that one. So in that case, had I gone to that Blount on a B slope at 4% and 150, it does break right over into HEL like I was talking about. And I'm sure you all have done enough of these in Colorado that these map units that break one way or another. So I guess just to show you the other part, once that's done, there's another sheet here where you can fill out the producer, the farm, the tract. Again, you have to select the county, but then you can put in your soil map units and put in your acres. Generally, you would be doing them with your acres out of ArcGIS. So 15 acres, your field is 40 acres. You know, it does a lot of the simple math for you. That just kind of keeps you from having to go through all that. Again, I might be speaking from ignorance. You all might have something similar to this, and if so, I'll shut up and move on. But it's
No, we do not.
okay. But feel free to just shush me and I'll go. Basically, it's a real handy tool. I did it to you all again. I'm sorry. Let me zoom in a little bit on that. Maybe zoom in instead of out, right, Steve? So maybe that's a little easier to see. But yeah, you can put your producer, farm, tract, what county, who did it. This is a really nice end determination sheet that you can just print it off, stick it in your file, and you've got it forever. And it's a lot easier to read. And it helps you when you're filling out your 026 as your answer. So that's one I like, but again, whether we'd have to adapt it one way or another, I don't know.
Yeah, let's follow up on that and see if we can make it adaptable.
Yeah.
Especially for wind.
I don't see why it wouldn't, because you're still using the ArcGIS factors for the erodibility, right? It's just using the C, depends which way it goes. I'll have to look at that a little bit. I'd be interested to learn, so I'd be happy to work with you a little bit on that one. So, all right, so I guess the demo didn't fail. I don't have to show this, but it's in there just to kind of jog your memory down the road. If this is something you want to look at, that's the tab. Just kind of explains what they do. I mean, really, in a nutshell, that's all you need for your determination. And once you have your slopes, your lengths, and a map, you've already got a map from FSA, shouldn't be all that bad. And one of the questions I guess we got in before this came up, how to store determinations. I don't know how Colorado does it. We're kind of soup to nuts in Ohio. Is you have some people store stuff religiously by tract file, which I think is the way to go. It makes a whole lot more sense to stay with tract files. There's a lot of areas that still file by people's last name. That one drives me up a wall because I have to remember who bought the farm off of who to figure out where the initial determination went. And in the hill country of Ohio, it's not that big a deal. People don't trade property all that often. But if you get into some of the areas that we have, they're trading every 6 months. So to try to keep track is impossible. So from out there in the field, what's most normal for storing determinations here?
In the tract file.
Okay. I find tract files really nice, and most FSAs will store by tract file regardless how NRCS does it, at least in Ohio again. So usually theirs are easier to find, and recons become so much easier. Tracks 5 and 6 become track 10,000. They just pick everything out of those two files and drop them in. So to answer that question, no, that's what I would go for. If you happen to have somebody, and this is the advice I've given at home, is that basically, let's say they did last names up until I came for a quality assurance review. I told them, stop doing that, start doing tracks, and eventually this will sort itself out. As Joe Schmo splits a field, they're going to have to find that one and then go put it in a track folder. I would never suggest that we try to go backwards and dig them all out if they're by last name or something else. And this is a really tough one to actually enforce, because the way the policy reads is you have to have a filing system. That's nice and vague. I have a filing system. It's a bunch of folders on a floor in my office. It's not very efficient, but it's a filing system. So there's really no prescribed way to do this. So it's really kind of a state call. Whether you want to make that part of the manual, go for it. But most everybody's doing it by track files. I just keep on going, not worry a lick about it. But the other thing you will want, I apologize for the tangent on track files there, but the calculation sheet of some kind, again, the two I just showed you there, oh, shoot, back up. Shift. There we go. That might be easier to see. So anyway, you need some kind of calculation sheet showing this was what your final result was to come up with the highly erodible, and a copy of the completed CPA 026. So, that one, you get 3 copies, one for you, one for FSA, one for the landowner. They all go out. And then, any written material for a con plan or a system, you want that in there. And I double started the Con 6 notes because I just can't say enough how important those really are. Probably less so for us on the HELs, but for the wetlands, they're vital because a lot of times we're getting 1026s come across and they're not determination questions, they're really management questions. Big thing in Ohio is clear all the fence rows. Nobody wants a fence row. So they're trying to take them all out. Well, we had to come up with a joint guidance that shows, if it's a single line, if it's a double line, it's a real mess. But they're sending us a 1026 for something that's already been determined. So in that case, in the Con 6 note, we just write down, hey, this guy was wanting to clear this. I told him go ahead. And, it just covers your butt down the road because you said what they could do. I don't know how common that is here, but everything's looking like an impediment to a 24-row planner right now. So that's how we're working in Ohio. So I was going to go a little bit into the whole RUSLE versus USLE. Can I get a show of hands who would like a bathroom break so you can stop listening to me for a few minutes?
Is this, yeah, we're gonna
Yeah.
get out of here.
Okay.